Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Munson, and this is my passion project for Criminal Justice 110, the police and mental health. So I just want to start off with like a little bit of context about this topic and why I decided to do it. So I feel like that mental health is something that's very important, mostly because there's still a negative stigma against it, and that a lot of the police departments really don't seem to be receiving as much training as they could be. Now, I can't speak for every department, but in this study by Lamb, Weinberger, and DeCua, they analyzed various documents about police training and the kinds of things that they should be doing and the kind of things they aren't doing. So, for example, they say that police have a legal obligation to respond to calls 24/7, and that they need to use their discretion to determine how to diffuse a situation. As you recall from our lectures about police discretion, that how important it is that police understand how to solve a situation, ideally without violence. And so they need to make a determination whether or not the individual is actually a danger or whether they're not a danger. And so that makes them gatekeepers. That's their job to basically function as a mediator between the criminal justice department and the community. And so, but sometimes, as you recall, the policies can influence police discretion. So, for example, if someone, like if the man, let's say they're arresting someone and the man murdered someone, rather than give them mental health support, they would have to arrest them because, as you know, murder is a capital offense. I mean, that's an extreme example, but it kind of shows you like how complicated this issue is. That and because the many ill people who are arrested, it's usually because the cops understand that arresting people is the go-to option, even though in most situations it probably wouldn't be. And so that's why Lamb, Weinberger, and DeCua say that there should be a strong relationship between police and mental health specialists. Like in these circumstances when they need to be able to diffuse a situation and to deal with a potential mental health crisis. And suicide by cop is just one of the many mental health crises that can occur. It's an issue that's very difficult to deal with because in police departments who are not sufficiently trained to deal with mental health and be able to diffuse situations, this can actually lead to a lot of issues. So the American Association of Suicidology is a nonprofit organization that advocates for both the awareness and the prevention of suicide. And they have a statistic here, 36%, and that's the rate of how they analyzed a bunch of police departments, and that was the percentage of shootings that ended in suicide by cop. Now, that's a very, very high number, as you can probably tell. Now, it does vary depending on the circumstances because in a study in the Annals of Emergency Medicine, they determined the rate was about 11%, but that was just in Los Angeles alone. Now, the 36% is a national total. Now, it's difficult to tell exactly what the actual rate is now because there's not a whole lot of research for like 2020 and the more recent years. But if the rate at the time was 36%, that is something that is way too high and needs to be reduced. So I'm now going to talk to you about Charles Kinsey. So I'm presenting this just as like a way to show how not to diffuse a situation. So you've probably seen this image. This is a still from a cell phone video that was recorded of the incident. So on July 18th, 2016 in North Miami, Florida, a patient named Ronaldo Rios Soto, who is the man sitting down on the right, he's a severely autistic man with an IQ of 40, and he ran away from the group home. And Charles Kinsey, who is the man laying down on the ground with his hands up, is one of the specialists at the home. And so Kinsey went outside to find Rios Soto, and he found him and tried to stop him. And there was a lot of miscommunication and misunderstandings that fell into play here, particularly that so the police were called because they were searching for a man who was armed and suicidal. And one of the officers who responded to this call was named Jonathan Aletta. And they get to this scene, and they thought that the patient was holding a gun, and he wasn't. He was actually holding like a silver toy truck. And Kinsey, as you can see in this photo, laid on the ground, put his hands up, and tried to defuse the situation. He tried to tell the cops, like, my patient's not violent. He's just holding a toy. Please don't shoot me. But like I said, there was a misunderstanding, and Aletta ended up shooting Kinsey in the leg. To which one of Aletta's colleagues asked him, basically, why the hell did you do that? And he just responded, I don't know. And Kinsey laid on the ground for about 20 minutes before receiving medical attention. And by that point, he, had been sufficiently injured. He didn't die as a result of this, but he did later sue the department, and Aletta ended up being found guilty of culpable negligence and attempted manslaughter due to his handling of the incident. Aletta, I believe, is out on probation right now, but he didn't serve the full sentence that he was given of about a year of probation. Okay, so now I'm going to transition into talking about different models for police outcomes. So you just saw an example of how not to defuse a situation. Now I'm going to present some examples of how to defuse a situation. So this was a study by Stedman and his team on Psychiatry Online. And they analyzed 3 police departments in Birmingham, Knoxville, and Memphis in order to see how they would handle mental health issues. I'm going to get back to this table in a little bit, but just starting off, so in Birmingham, over the past 20 years, the police created a community service officer team. And so what this team is it's essentially, rather than being cops, it's civilian social workers. So they don't carry weapons, they're not sworn officers, they don't wear uniforms, they don't have cruisers. I mean, they have radios, but they don't have any of weapons or any police equipment. And they actually receive a different sort of training. They have 6 weeks of training and are available 24/7. And their job is, when there's a mental health call, to go out into the field because they have knowledge of the situation and they're able to be able to diffuse the situations easier. Memphis and Knoxville don't have so much a community service officer team, but they do have teams who specialize in trying to solve crisis intervention, as well as a mobile crisis hotline in order to be able to talk to mental health patients over the phone 24/7 and not having to go out into the field and potentially be in danger if that's the situation at hand. Now, of course, the issue is that a lot of these officers don't really, there's a limited amount of staff to be able to deal with these situations. But even despite that, if you look at this table here, so this table I pulled right off the study. And so I'm not going to explain all the math because I don't want to bore you with a bunch of statistics. But as you can see, so the response and arrest percentage. So for example, in Birmingham, the 28% of responses on the scene, 13 people got arrested. Knoxville, 40% of cases, 5 got arrested. So you can see from this that that these kind of community and social workers really got engaged more in the police department and really helped to reduce the arrest rates of the patients. And there's also this study about what do police officers really want from the mental health system. So this was originally published by Penn State, but is later on a hospital and psychiatric journal. And so this is a table. I know it's a little hard to read. I apologize for that. But this is basically showing statistics. They interviewed a whole bunch of cops in the Cincinnati metropolitan area. and they asked them about their experiences with mentally ill individuals, and they asked them what kinds of things they would want to see from the mental health system. As you can see here, 96.7% want to know if someone left without absence. 93.9% want to know if someone is about to commit suicide, and about the same amount want to know someone's past history of suicide. Now you can like pause the video and read this for yourself, but it really does seem that they do support the mental health system, and that if it's a really bad situation like potential suicide, they want to know that they want to be able to understand what kind of danger that they're in and like how to best deal with the situation. All right, and so on July 1st, I had the privilege of talking to Master Corporal William Smith of the Newark Police Department to ask him about how the NPD handles mental health issues. Now, Master Corporal Smith is he was very helpful, and he agreed that mental health is a very complicated issue. Now, he said that the team, depending on the situation, whether it's a mental health call, a suicide call, or welfare check, they can get between 3 to 5 calls a day. And there's different categories of mental health. So it depends so depending on what the situation is, they'll have to respond in a different way. So whether someone's depressed, whether someone needs transport somewhere, those kinds of things. And they also need to be able to determine if someone actually is mentally ill or if they're just like under the influence of drugs and alcohol, because both of those can, although albeit kind of rarely, they can show similar symptoms. And he said as far as training, that the Newark Police Department receives yearly training and in mental health, which actually surprised me because I honestly didn't. I mean, I can't speak for other departments, but I find it very encouraging that the NPD receives training, and even some receive what they call crisis intervention training, which is how to deal with a mental health crisis and the best way to deal with that. Some of the officers actually go through that. That's actually a much longer process. That's about a week-long course, and it's done through like mental health institutions, and even professional psychologists come in and tell the officers what works and then what kind of things to look out for. Sometimes even patients come in to say what kind of things work for them and what other things don't. And Smith also was talking about relations with the mental health system, that he was saying that mental health is very complicated because there's new conditions that come up every time, like PTSD in veterans, those kinds of issues. Since there's such a broad spectrum to mental health, each situation needs to be looked at differently, and it's very difficult to be able to do that, especially with the limited resources that they may have at the NPD. But one of the things that Smith stressed was that they want to be able to help people, like getting them the resources, getting them the directions they need. And if they need medication, if they become suicidal, then they'll try and help them, like they'll try and diffuse the situation. They'll try and make sure that they have the resources that they need. But otherwise, it's very difficult because there's a lack of doctors that they have with them. There's conditions that people may not know they even have mental health. So, like he said, we have to look at every situation because every situation is different and will require a different way to diffuse it. And the one thing that I thought was very interesting was that Smith actually mentioned what we call mental health courts. Now, Delaware actually does have a mental health court system. It began in 2003. So it's relatively new. Only certain people are eligible for this program, such as people who have recurring mental issues or have substance abuse disorders. And every official who's a part of this program works with about 30 defendants at any given time. And so in 2006, they were doing a study to test the efficacy of this program. So there were 139 offenders who were eligible for the program at the time in 2006. And they gave them a handbook, explained the rules to them, said, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. 7 people ended up being kicked out of the program for failing to comply with the rules. But but they found out that after giving people, mental health care, giving them the medication, giving them resources, giving them access to all these mental health resources, they found that the recidivism rate was only 8%. That meaning 92% of the people who went through the program did not commit a crime again. And I find that extraordinary that they were able to do something like that. I mean, Delaware is a small state, true, but but I still find it amazing that they were able to prevent these people from committing crimes in the future. And you may be asking yourself, do other states have mental health courts? The short answer is yes. Now, since mental health courts are a relatively new concept, as you recall from our chapter on courts, we didn't really talk a whole lot about mental health, but there are other courts around, but not in every state. Like some of the sources I said, they're like, oh, only 30, maybe 40 states have mental health courts, and it actually varies quite a bit. Like Florida has 27, California has 7. Like it's quite a range of how we deal with these kinds of issues. And so in conclusion, I think we can all agree that mental health is very important, but as far as the best way to deal with it, that is hard to say. I mean, personally, what I would say is more funding for the mental health courts, because as you recall from me talking about the mental health courts in Delaware, that seems to be very important. Like it seems to be working and it seems to be helping these people. But of course, that was a small study of 139 people. When you get into larger cities that have ideally larger prison populations, trying to figure out how to convert, this format to another is going to be very difficult. And especially since this is and like I said earlier, since this is a very new concept, there's not a whole lot of research about the efficiency or the efficacy of mental health courts. So, it's still up in the air about whether or not they actually work, but whether they would work for everybody. And improving police mental health relations. So definitely, I think police officers should have a close relationship with mental health specialists. I mean, the Newark Police Department certainly does. That they have mental health specialists, not necessarily working for the department, but at least on call. That if they need help with a situation, they can call them and they can get pointers and tips for how to deal with that. But definitely, I think every police department across the country should be able to get mental health resources to be able to, not just for the police, but also just to be able to help the community in improving the mental health that we have in the United States. And police officers also should get mental health counseling because, as you recall from our police discretion chapter, sometimes if police are just in a really crappy mood, then they'd be more likely to arrest somebody. So police should be getting mental health counseling over time. Now, of course, this wasn't the focus of this presentation, but I feel as though that was an important thing to touch on, that officers themselves are also people and they need the same mental health counseling that an average citizen would get. And definitely hiring more social workers, because social workers, as we saw in the Birmingham study, that hiring more social workers really help to reduce the arrest rate of people in the community who had mental health issues. But, of course, these results may not work for everybody because, as you said with those statistics, that was a small sample pool. So, we can't, correlate that with a larger amount of people. But in the end, I think that once we improve relationships, improve the police relationship with the community, improve the mental health relationships with police, we can work towards creating a better system that doesn't treat mental health any differently just because it's a police officer or because you have a mental illness. Here's the citations I had for my presentation. Uh, yeah, thank you for your time.